everyone. I'm Deborah Gardner with Hospitality Today Live. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We are just delighted to always have such great guests here talking about their amazing real life experiences and topics, opinions, stories, and lessons right here on Hospitality Today Live. And today, well, we have a very special guest for you. His name is Alan Kleinfeld. He is the director of Arrive Conference Solutions, and he is the meeting management expert in safety and security due to his time as a public safety officer while continuing to serve as a law enforcement officer. And what is Alan going to discuss with us today? Well, he's going to talk about event safety and security and how we aren't done with COVID-19 yet. And what does the future of meetings and events look like right now and in the future, along with so many tips to help keep your meeting and event safe and so much more. So you're not going to want to miss this, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Chatgames.com. Well, hello, Alan. We are so excited to have you here today.
Hey, Deborah. It's great to see you again.
This is just a very, very important episode, along with, of course, it's always so much fun with you. So thank you so much for being here with us, because as a meeting management expert in the field, the area of safety and security, I could imagine that you are so busy right now.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying so. It comes and goes depending on things like COVID or climate or active shooters or just what's going on in the industry. And it's like a lot of other stuff. It has its ups and its downs. And for the most part, what keeps me busiest is trying to stay on top of all the changes that come with things like COVID-19, which, as you know, is still kind of an unknown to a certain extent.
It certainly is. It certainly is. But at first, before we get into the depth part of this whole situation that we're in right now, can you share with our viewers your background that makes you this expert?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my background's actually in meeting planning, and further back, I got my degree in professional writing, my undergraduate in professional writing, which was a mix of journalism and PR and things of that nature. And then somewhere along the line, I fell into meeting planning, and I kept doing that for a long time and actually combined the two at some point, where I was an editor and a meeting planner at a nonprofit association. And I was living in DC when 9/11 occurred. And one of my reactions to 9/11 was to try to help my community somehow. And I signed up as a reserve police officer about 6 months after that event took place, after that incident. And I've been involved with law enforcement pretty much ever since, to the point where I started combining it with my meeting planning some years ago. And I still am active in law enforcement. I'm still active in meeting planning, and I have my CMP and I have my certification as a police officer. So it all just kind of come together. And I tend to try to stay up on all of that stuff as I can to help people I work with.
Well, that is very interesting, because I mean, you have such a vast experience all around, and that makes you very, very valuable to our industry in particular. And of course, you know, this has just been an unbelievable 18, 19 months that we've been dealing with this whole pandemic. But as you know, because of, you know, you being in the industry a long time, along with myself, this is not our first rodeo.
No.
This is something that we are very used to. It just turned out that this one was a beast. This one was a different type of animal. And so for you to to be involved with safety and security. I mean, are we going to be done with this whole thing, or is it going to come back? Or, I mean, we're always going to see another pandemic down the road, but are we even done with COVID? And if so, if not, what's our next step?
So that's a great question, Deborah. I just like pretty much everyone else, I was affected by 2020. And I lost a lot of business, and people were not holding meetings, and then things started to go virtual and then became hybrid. And then, as you all know, we got the vaccinations. And right now it kind of feels almost normal. People are meeting face to face or having some kind of hybrid version, which is kind of like two events at once. You have the virtual and then you have the on-site. So it feels like it's okay right now. It's steady and peaceful and it's gone. COVID, I don't think, and this is just my prediction, I am not a medical doctor, but I do read a lot about what's going on. And as you all have probably heard, there's a new variant out there, the Delta variant. And right now it is what's causing most of the cases around the world and in the United States. This is the most current information. So it's not going anywhere yet. And my prediction is as the variant starts to spread, those who are not yet vaccinated, which is still quite a bit of people, that's going to cause another kind of snowball effect, probably not nearly as big as it was before, but it's still going to be one of those things where if you do want to get out, you do want to travel, you do want to meet face to face, you want to do something in hospitality, it's going to become a concern because that variant is actually more contagious than previously thought. So that's going to be one of those things that we have to keep on the horizon. I have been advising groups that I'm working with right now for meetings that are 4, 5, 6 months down the road that I've been helping with for the last 6 months. You should be preparing for these events as if you're going to have full COVID compliance, because it's going to be easier to draw that stuff back than it is to provide it at the last minute. For example, if you don't provide masks or hand sanitizers, or your space isn't set for distancing, and the variant does come back and we do have another outbreak of COVID, and the hotel you're planning to use says to you as the meeting planner, sorry, we have to go back to COVID conditions, it's going to be really hard for you to kind of find those masks and find those sanitizers and get all that set up at the last minute. So even though there's an expense associated with it, my advice is prepare for these face-to-face events, especially if you're going to have a lot of people indoors, to prepare as if you need to be COVID compliant.
Yeah, those are very good points. Thank you for sharing that, because you would think after going through other pandemics, recessions, and other things that we have to deal with, you would think we would have been ready. Alan, why weren't we ready for this?
Yeah, that is a really good question, Deborah, and I wish I had more information about that, because I think we were. I think we were ready to a certain extent, and when it came time to swing at that ball, we just weren't ready. We were just a little too slow when that pitch came, and it was like, this can't be actually happening. It was almost like, we have our lizard brain, our trauma brain, and that's the part of our brain that makes us survive, that we fight or flight. And I think this started happening, and we were all kind of like, nah, this isn't really happening, and we just froze.
Right.
What's kind of interesting about the whole thing is now that we have a path of trying to get through this, it's funny that a lot of us are kind of upset with these habits we've developed, or are tired of these habits that we developed. But there's so much reduction in colds and flus and other illnesses because we've been masked up and we've been cleaning so much. So it's not a complete bad thing that we had to go through this. But I tend to think that we were ready, but we just weren't prepared to actually take that first step. I think like you'd mentioned, we'll probably have other pandemics down the road, but there'll probably be a more swift reaction next time.
Okay, that's good to know. So
we're, as a country and as a species, I think we're very reactive and less proactive, and that's changing over time.
I have to agree with you 100%. And that's something that we need to work on and change in the industry. There's no doubt. I believe that, what you just said earlier too, about having to stay fully on board regarding, COVID restrictions and requirements and things like that. But have you seen that we're loosening up those, those areas already? I mean, we're already seeing in-person meetings. Are we too soon at this? I don't see people wearing masks at these in-person meetings. So are we getting too confident too quick?
That's also an excellent question. And I don't think we are, only because, and I'm going to say, I hope I'm saying this in the right way. For a large part of our community, we're well-traveled, we have good common sense, we're hard workers. And I think for us to get out there and travel and do what we do, we realize we have a responsibility. So I think a lot of people in our industry and our audiences are getting those vaccinations. And
Yes.
I will say, along with this, just about any other medical professional, which I'm not, that if you're vaccinated and you're in a room full of other vaccinated people, you'll probably be just fine. And so I think it's okay to do that. And if you're going to be one of those groups that's going to require vaccinations, fine. I won't get into the legalities of that. I would suggest to any client or any group, talk to your lawyer or your in-house counsel and find out how that works. You can have waivers so that you don't have a liability. You can do that kind of stuff and be perfectly safe. It's those that don't take those precautions, and meeting planners don't always have control over all of their attendees. And even if you say, hey, do you promise to be vaccinated and show me this and come and be safe? You don't actually know if that attendee is doing that. And it only takes one person with the COVID or the variant to spread it. And then, and just as a reminder, the vaccine's not a cure. You can still get the disease with the vaccination, and you can still spread the disease, or at least at the latest study, I think you can still spread the disease with the vaccination. The vaccination is supposed to prevent serious illness and death from COVID, but just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean that you're 100% protected. So it's that kind of stuff that makes me recommend, hey, you probably should still have some masks and some hand sanitizer on hand, unless you require everyone to be vaccinated.
Good point. Good point. Wow. There were some things you just said I did not even know. I thought since I had my vaccination, I was okay and I'm all set. But oh my gosh, that's kind of a shocker. And I'm glad you shared that, because I had no idea whatsoever. Yeah. So when you were talking about the waivers and all the protocols and everything, I mean, it tells me, first of all, meeting and event professionals have a lot on their plate. They have so much. They wear so many hats. And now, you know, what's in their DNA? Safety and security. It used to be technology, but now it's safety and security.
That's right. That's right.
How are they going to do safety and security too? I mean, how are they going to do all of this?
It's a lot. It is a lot. And it's funny because when I think of safety, it's such a big umbrella, because there's physical safety, like the space we're using, is it safe? And then there's environmental safety, like are we in a place where the climate change is not going to, are we going to have a forest fire and have to evacuate? To things like food safety, is the kitchen where I'm going, is it clean? Do I have to worry about allergens? And do I have attendees that need to worry about that? So it's really a big thing. And there are probably a couple of ways you can handle it. One way is and I've said this for a long time, it is a habit you have to build, but I say it, you need to kind of add safety into your other logistical items. So for example, when you are doing your site visit and you're looking at your meeting space, you're looking in your head, or you're designing how it's going to be laid out, don't forget to add things like emergency exits or emergency telephones, or where the outlets are, or where the fire extinguishers are. Mark those on your meeting space. And as you do that kind of stuff, it becomes a habit. And you can do it with your food and beverage. You know, you can, when you start looking at your menus, you can say, oh, do we need to have a vegetarian option? Did I make sure that the kitchen is certified by the local municipal codes? And that can just be checkoff lists that you add to your list you already have. You can do it with AV. So when you're doing your AV, you make sure your vendors that you're using are taping down all the cables, and that they have backup extension cords, and that they have, if they have a technology needs, that they've got backups for that. So that's one thing you can do, is try to combine it so that it doesn't actually feel like a bunch of extra work. It's just added to something that already exists, which you'd be doing anyway, because every year your meeting is going to change. You might have more people or more meals or different technology or whatever. So it's one of those things where if you can build the habit, it's good. The other thing you can do is make it part of the whole team effort. So in your office, for example, if you're the meeting planner and you're focusing on the meeting and you don't want to hold the whole safety thing in your hands, give the technology part to your IT people and say, I need you to make sure that we're not going to be hacked and that we're up to date on the software, and that when I take my laptop on site and I have all my registration database there, that it's safe. And then you can hand off to your HR people or your finance people things about insurance policies and things about fire safety, like what regulations that are required at the place you're going. So you can kind of spread it out that way. And then, of course, you can always ask colleagues when you go to your meetings and your association groups where you are meeting with other meeting planners.
Sure.
That's what they're doing and how they handle it, and make it part of the community effort, because everyone's safety's not going anywhere, and as we get through COVID and new trends come and things start to change, it's something
Right.
meeting planners will have to deal with.
Right. So I was talking to a client not too long ago, and she actually, and I don't know if this is a new idea or what for most meeting and event professionals, but she has a command control center established on site, like I guess it's another room that they have to get from the hotel. But have you heard of that? And if so, what's in that room?
Man, I want to know who that client is, because I love that idea. That is something that is very, very law enforcement. When where I am, we have hurricanes. And so whenever there's any kind of event like that coming, we activate our emergency operations center, which is very similar to what it sounds like you're describing. And I think that's a great idea. And it's one of those things where if you have the staff board, or if you've assigned it to an individual who can manage that center, that control center, well, then you got your physical safety covered. You probably have a relationship with the venue and you know who the staff are. You probably have your medical safety covered, because someone's going to be in contact with local law enforcement, fire and EMS for something going wrong on site, especially for a big conference or citywide. If you have something like that, it's a great tool. Now that you mention it, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 convention centers in the country that also now have command centers for that kind of thing as well. So I had never heard of an individual meeting planner having that as part of their meeting. It's a great idea.
Yeah, why not?
I would love to know how they're doing it.
That's great. Well, I'll hook you up with them. That's for
That'd be
sure.
great.
Well, and you mentioned earlier too that safety and security is changing quite a bit, very fast. Everything's moving fast right now. Could you share with us some of the safety trends that are coming on board?
Sure. So we already know about COVID and health-related stuff. That's not going to leave our minds anytime soon. So that's probably going to be an ongoing one. I do think it's going to be one of those things, kind of like the flu, where we'll probably end up having to get booster shots or some type of vaccination on some kind of regular basis, maybe every year, every other year, just depending on how that thing evolves. But then there's other things like climate change, we've talked about for a long time, but it's gotten to the point where it's so serious now that it's affecting how our attendees might be experiencing their time on site. The wildfires in the West, the droughts in the West, the hurricane seasons in the Southeast, all that stuff impacts location, date, size of groups we can have, and what's going to happen when we have an incident we have to deal with. So we have to look at things along that nature. Something that's going to be ongoing for a long time is cybersecurity. And I will tell this, meeting planners aren't IT experts. So don't try to manage IT security or cybersecurity. Get your IT team to do it, or someone else on your staff that is their job, is IT. Work with them and just make sure that they are checking their boxes off. There's along the line of technology, I don't know how it's going to be used, but drones are going to come into play in meeting planning, and it's going to be in a variety of ways. First of all, meeting planners may use them as part of their entertainment experience, or to capture the experience with a camera. Law enforcement is already using drones to do surveys and do security and make sure maybe going over water or under a bridge to make sure everything's nice and clear. But that also means bad guys might be able to use drones against us as well. So that's one of the things that we just have to stay on top of and see how it goes. And then we have things like again with the COVID, you're going to have different health safeties, because once we take off these masks and start following all these protocols, like I mentioned earlier, we'll probably have increases of flu and the cold. So that might be something we just want to keep an eye on. And then lastly, which we didn't hear much of at all in 2020, but we're hearing a lot now, and it's been happening even though we didn't hear about it. It's just the news cycle. Active shooters or active threats. We call them active threats now because it's not always a shooter. And this isn't to say that your meeting might become a target for an active shooter. It's just to say that at least on some level, your meeting planner and the meeting planner staff should have some training on how to respond to an active threat and have some minimal language for your attendees. Are there ways to determine if you're going to have a threat at your event? Even though the case has been closed by the FBI, they still don't know why the guy in Las Vegas started shooting from that window down on that crowd at the music festival. Still have no idea. Humans are just sometimes unpredictable. And so that's just one of those things that I don't want planners to freak out about it and say, oh, no, my God, someone's going to bring a gun into my meeting. But there are some minimal steps that don't take a lot of time to put into play that can help protect your staff, your stakeholders, and your attendees.
Wow, that is an unbelievable amount of trends that we know are going to come true. And the drones, I mean, I never thought the drones would be a future. I know they are at home and people's personal lives, but I always think about them flying around a meeting room and fall on somebody's head. So they're going to have to really build those well. Yeah,
I've actually seen live video of a French soldier riding a drone as he had a rifle, and he was using it to be able to shoot down on the enemy. So if the good guys can use it for good stuff, that means the bad guys might have to use it for bad stuff. That's going to be another complicated thing because of FAA regulations and all registrations and policies around drones. But it's something that eventually we'll see.
Yeah, and it's always evolving. And I love the idea of training. I think training is key to our industry, and not just the meeting and event professionals. I mean, I think the hotel staff, the venue staff, I mean, everybody just like, you and I both have our CMP, we are trained. So I think that should become like a norm, don't you think, for everybody in the industry?
I agree. And one of the things that I usually ask groups I'm working with, so I have this really long list, this very long checklist of things that I go through with the hotel. And one of the things I always ask is about their medical training. And some hotels and some brands are actually requiring their staff to go through CPR training or some basic first aid for stopping a bleed or things like that. But it's definitely one of those things where I ask, I'm going to ask my venue, hey, we're not bringing an AED with us. Are you guys trained in CPR? Do you have an AED? Things of that nature. If it's a citywide and the demographic is right, you might even ask the local EMS to stage an ambulance nearby in case they need to respond quickly, things like that.
Yeah. And it's all about preparation. It's all about being prepared, not necessarily that things are going to happen, but just to be prepared and have that confidence that if something did happen, we would be able to protect ourselves. So I totally agree with what you're sharing and what you're doing. But I tell you that I would imagine the meetings and events industry, the future of it is definitely going to look different, right?
It is. And, it's funny that you mentioned that as well, because somehow I think this is tied in. Right now we're coming through this COVID aspect and everyone's out there doing face-to-face. Something that I think we need to look at down the road, and it's not directly a safety and security thing, but it's going to influence it, is the cost of doing business. So right now, the industry is trying to make up for lost time and lost money, and they're doing a good job. And right now it's kind of a seller's market when it comes to meeting planning. And it might be that way for a couple of years, to the extent that you might not be able to find space for your meeting down the road, or you might have to decide to go someplace that isn't as safe as you would like it to be, or doesn't meet all the requirements that you want it to be. So just keep that on the horizon, that for the next couple of years, might be a little more competitive to get what you want from your venues, your locations, your your travel partners, things of that nature.
Yeah, good point. Good point. So do you see 2022 as a comeback year, or do you think it's going to explode, or what's your thoughts for next
So
year?
my thought is this: if prices don't go crazy, 2022 will be a banner year for tourism as far as personal tourism, vacations, families, things like that. I think for events and meetings and conferences, it might take a little longer to have that boom, because there are still groups, depending on the demographic, their audience and their stakeholders, that are going to stay virtual or hybrid for a couple of years. And that could be for a bunch of reasons, but one of them is probably going to be safety and security revolving around COVID. So I think 2020 is going to see more face-to-face events, but it's not going to be the big boom that we think we might get in 23 or 24.
Well, and when you remember 9/11, it's kind of the same thing. We had to wait. We had to go through, the process before anything came back. And by the time we get to 2019 numbers, it could take another 2 or 3 years, right?
I agree. I think it's going to take a while. I think there are some people in the industry who are like, "Hey, we're back. It's great." But we're only back to a certain extent if you think of it in terms of service. So most hotels are back to 100% capacity, but they're not back to 100% service for whatever reason. They don't have the funds, they don't have the staff, there's not a demand for it. So it's going to feel a little different. And it may never actually come back to pre-COVID's feeling, but it's going to be a while before it comes back to what you were just saying about having those pre-19 numbers and having all the 100% service that we have gotten used to.
Yeah. And everybody's got to be patient for that, because
everyone does.
It is what it is.
It is what it is, and more little things are just going to keep popping up. And and now that we've dealt with it, we can probably take a deep breath and say, okay, here's another thing we're going to deal with. The word that we're really sick of hearing is pivoting. But our industry pivots like no other industry pivots, and so we know how to pivot.
Right. So what you're saying is everything's going to be a normal process, just like back for 9/11, as long as that Delta variant doesn't get out of control.
Yeah. As far as COVID goes, we get vaccinated and keep that up. And one of the things to point out about COVID, and this is something that people also need to keep in mind, it's still a new disease or a new virus, and we still don't know a whole bunch about it. Just now, you're learning, like today we learned that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has another side effect. I don't know if another side effect, but it has a side effect now, and it causes, I can't remember the name of the disease. I forget what it's called.
Remember all those.
I know, but it has a side effect. And people are going to freak out about it because it's a side effect, and the media is going to blow it up. But there have been 12 million vaccines in the U.S. of Johnson & Johnson, and there has been like 1 death from the side effect. So if you look at it in terms of the overall number, it's obviously not good that anyone died, but the side effect is so rare, they're saying don't stop getting the vaccination. So it's going to be kind of like that. And we're still learning so much more about the disease. Like, for example, when they created the vaccine, they didn't know how long it was going to be good for. They just knew, and so now they're thinking maybe 8 months, maybe 12 months. So as we keep learning more and more about this disease, we'll be able to treat it more effectively. And that's going to take some time. And every time it mutates and we have a new virus, we're going to have to start this. We're going to start doing it over and over again. It may never be as big as the pandemic, but to a certain extent, people in general have to deal with it. If you think about the fact that about 30,000 people die every year from the flu, that never makes the news.
Right, I know, right?
Right. But people die every year from the flu, and we deal with it. We just go on and we get a new vaccine every year, and hopefully the vaccine's better the year after and it's more effective. And I tend to think as we learn more and more about COVID, and it will take years, that will happen.
Right. Excellent information. So as we wrap up today, are there any tips to keep, I guess this is a message for meeting and event professionals, are there any tips that they can keep to, keep their meetings and events safe? Is there?
Yeah.
Anything that you'd like to share?
I have one kind of general overall tip that I'll give you, or that I'll give meeting planners or those who are watching. We get a lot of our information from the media or social media or wherever. And information is just that, information. Sometimes you don't know if it's true or false, and it gets blown out of proportion so quickly, especially on social media, because there's no management of facts or fiction on social media in general. So what I like to advise people is, don't look for information, look for intelligence. Get intelligent sources. So for example, you're having your meeting in Boston in the middle of February, and you don't know if the snowstorm on the Weather Channel is really as bad as it looks. Call your contacts in Boston, or your hotelier, or your venue, and say, hey, Sue, I'm watching Weather Channel and it looks like you guys are buried under 15 feet of snow. And Sue's going to say, no, it's just 3 inches. And I've had that personal experience where living here in Charleston, the hurricanes are going on around us. My mom's freaking out because she sees it on the Weather Channel and all the buildings are underwater. And she calls me and she's like, are you safe? Are you alive? What's going on? I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, the Weather Channel says there's a hurricane going on and you're underwater. And I'm like, no. And what really had happened was the news had just gotten a shot of a car underwater in this one dip in the road. And they had used that to kind of say, this is a really bad weather storm. And it may have been a serious weather storm, but you need to confirm that. So get intelligence, not information.
Okay, I like that. That is a great tip, a very strong one that everyone needs to embrace, because, oh my gosh, safety and security, it's not going away. I'm just glad that it's been taken more seriously.
Yes.
Mainly because of this whole situation, but in the past it hasn't. And now it really has sunk in to everyone's mindset that, hey, this has to be top of mind. So that is key. That is key. So how can everybody get a hold of you so that they can continue this conversation and, oh my gosh, and pick your brain for even more?
I'd be happy to help anyone with their brain picking. I have a LinkedIn account, and then just search for Alan Kleinfeld, and I've got a website, arrivemanagement.com, and my email and phone number, I think, are scrolling at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to reach out, and I love providing intelligence when I can. Oh,
wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, that I tell you what, you're an icon in the industry. There's no doubt about it. And I just, I think that the world of you, because you have such, again, a big, vast experience within the industry and outside the industry. It just makes sense for you to be an expert in this area. So thank you so much for your time here. My gosh, we really, really appreciate it. And we know that we'll be seeing you out in some meetings and events sometime soon, right?
You will, Deborah. Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful.
I really appreciate it.
Same here. Thanks, Alan.
Take care.
Well, there you have it. We had the one and only Alan Kleinfeld, who is the director of Arrive Conference Solutions, with us. And I know you enjoyed it as much as I did, right? And if so, by all means, you can look at this episode again just by taking a look at our Facebook page, our YouTube, and our LinkedIn page as well. And please share it. I know this information will be very, very valuable for people that are in the meetings and events industry, because everyone needs to hear what Alan had to share with us today. And we want to thank our sponsor for this episode today, Video Chat Game Shows.com. So you'll have to check them out as well. And if you have any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to share with us, by all means, send it to hello@hospitalitytodaylive.com. We would love very much to hear from you. So I want to say thank you so much, and definitely join us next week. I'm Deborah Gardner with Hospitality Today Live on behalf of our growing staff here. And remember, if you're thinking about it, we're talking about it right here on Hospitality Today Live.